Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and all points in between. It's me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire, here to welcome you back down to the Gamer's Den. As you can plainly see, we're going with a slightly different setup for today's episode, and that's because today what I want to do is I want to take all the ideas and concepts I've been talking about in the last handful of episodes and use all that to bring everything together and put together a campaign here for you. I want to show you step by step how to do it, the amount of work that goes into it, and show you all the way around how you go about putting together a much more solid campaign that's going to be much more fun for yourself and for your players to run through. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started here. All right, so just before we get started here, I want to mention a little bit of a caveat when it comes to putting together these campaigns. Depending on the game that you're playing, there may already be a setting already done up for you ahead of time. Actually, chances are there are probably several settings done up ahead of time depending on the game. For example, Dungeons and Dragons, we already have the classic Faerun setting already done up. You already have a lot of really great and really cool locations like Waterdeep, Kalimshan, um, Neverwinter, and all of this is already done. So a good deal of work is already going to be done for you. You just have to read up on it a little bit and get familiar, especially if your adventure and your campaign is going to be located around a certain region. Like knowing that Waterdeep is the city of splendor is going to be particularly important if you're putting together a campaign that's centered in the city of Waterdeep. Now, um, when after you've got your location picked out, the only other thing you really have to do is decide what your plot is and work up some of your own particular unique NPCs, or decide if some of the pre-made NPCs that already exist within the setting are going to be sufficient for your game. Personally, I find a mix of the two is going to be the most likely. You're going to have to come up with your own NPCs now, depending on the location. Like if you're using Red Wizards of Thay as the primary antagonist for your campaign, you can style your NPCs around the Red Wizards are like. You know, with the head tattoos, red robes, and utilizing some pretty ruthless mercenary forces as part of their military arm. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself here. In this particular case, what I'm going to be doing here is putting together an entirely new custom setting. I, I've always enjoyed this a bit more than using pre-made stuff. Not that I've never played around with running things in Faerun before, but I don't know. Some part of me just likes a little bit of extra work, I suppose. Now, for this setting, I'm not going to be putting together a grand campaign, something that's going to be long running and sweeping. That's not enough time for that. But for now, what we are going to do is we're just going to design a setting that's located primarily to just a city and a couple of outlying towns. It's probably going to start in one of these outlying towns. Now, one thing I should mention here, if any of you aspiring DMs or currently running storytellers are anything like me, it's coming up with names is always a pain in the ass. It's one of the things I struggle with most, but like anything else, you just have to practice doing it, and it will get easier the more you do it. So let's go ahead and get started here. And shortly right thereafter is when the camera started to go out on me, started zooming in and out of focus at random, and ruined several different shots without me realizing it. So I have had to go through and reshoot, and well, I figured since I already had so much written down anyways, hell with it, I'd start writing out a lot more, and I'm just going to show you step by step how this all goes and works out and give my thoughts, advice, and tips along the way. Overall, I've left the campaign, uh, this adventure not fully finished, but the idea is that I've done enough to for any of you to take any of this information if you wanted or so chose to. You could take it and make it your own. You can change or adjust things here or there, but I wanted to cover some of the key points that I talked about in previous episodes, just so that way I could give you a clear example of what it is I'm talking about when it comes to details, when it comes to thinking out your plots and your antagonists and the thought and care that needs to go into those things in order to produce a better thought out, planned, and just generally much more fun campaign for yourself and for your players to run. With that said, now let's go ahead and really jump into this. All right, so like we talked about before, when it comes to putting these campaigns together, the devil is always going to be in the details. Very rarely can you ever have too many details. The more details that you have packed into a campaign, the more options that you have. And when I say details, I don't mean describe every single last stone and tree and leaf to the players in just excruciating, long-winded detail. No, 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 nothing like that. You don't need to ramble on for 10 minutes waxing poetic about the guy that's trimming the hedges. Now, the details you're focusing on are the details you put into producing the campaign. The more details you can produce in regards to the campaign, the region, the important NPCs, the antagonists, and the supporting cast, it will just it will just pay out dividends for you down the line. It just makes everything so much easier, especially if your players, like I talked about before, decide to go off the beaten path and decide, hey, let's take a look down over here along this part of the riverbank. Let's see what's down over here. Or, oh, hell, let's go find some weird oddball shop. Or, a random NPC. I'm going to glom onto him and we're going to be best friends now. You have to have details and details and resources prepared ahead of time to make it easier for you to develop this. It lets you react faster without breaking immersion. It keeps your players immersed in what feels like a living, thriving world. Yes, we're just playing at a tabletop, but the idea is you're getting your players absorbed into the story. Now, how much in the way of details you need to throw in just depends on how big of a scope of an adventure you're looking to put together. Now, if you're looking for something that's going to be wide ranging, going across the countryside or even across multiple continents, then you're going to need to prepare and think about a lot ahead of time, or at least the more that you can, the better off you'll be. It just saves you so much trouble when you get the campaign going. In this particular case, for this adventure that I've been producing here for this episode in particular, I've just decided to set this in just a smaller location, just focusing on a particular region, not even a huge region, a valley, more or less. And this particular region is the Ilaran Hills. The primary hub for the Ilaran Hills region is the city of Tildeus, with a population of 30,000 people. Over here, I've listed the percentages for the various races that you can find here, so it gives you an idea of what this city looks like, who the primary cultural influences are, but it also shows you that this city is a little bit cosmopolitan. We have representatives of other of the standard fantasy races, dwarves, halflings, elves, and there's a smattering 1% of some other characters there as well too. So if you want to place a unique NPC there with a particular race, say a tiefling, you can throw that in there with some reasonable explanation. We've gone through and figured out the primary alignment for the city of Tildeus, which is lawful neutral. We've also figured out the mayor, Darnath Mayfellow, a lawful neutral human, cavalier level 4, level 5 expert. He, as a nobleman, he does have some skill as a warrior, knightly training in fact, and he also has 5 levels of expert, which given his lawful neutral status, I'd put towards the necessary skills to represent his skill as an administrator, handling all the day-to-day legal activities that a city may require. Then below that, we have the captain of the guard, Shar Almace, a lawful good half-elven fighter, level 9. And the reason why I picked these two characters in particular is these two, the players are definitely going to have interactions with at some point, maybe more frequently depending on how the course of the campaign goes or however you want to structure it. But at some point during the course of the events for this particular adventure, what I envision is that they will be interacting with the players at some point, likely definitely the climax of the adventure, but certainly there's a possibility they may interact beforehand. And a little extra detail that I threw in for the city are the exports and imports that the city engages with in their trade, the local economy, as it were. They export a great deal of livestock, foodstuffs, and timber. And since they export a lot of raw goods and the like, they import a lot of finished goods and luxury items and ores for their local craftsmen to work with. Now, what city is complete without some interesting locations to go with? Again, I've only done a little bit as far as locations of interest go. Certainly, a city of 30,000 people will have many more interesting things than just two places, but again, I designed this campaign with the intent of showing you how to put together a better campaign with more details and more locations. And from here, we're starting wide and then focusing in on smaller details and then going in further on other smaller details within those. Now, for these ones here, the first location of interest is the Market Square. And then we have Runehammer Forge. The owner is Ragtharn Durandal, a lawful good dwarf, level 3 fighter, level 8 expert. He's devoted a good deal of his life towards working the forge, hammering metals out into various shapes and tools. And I've also given him a quick description. Stocky as per his kin, this red-haired dwarf is perpetually growling at his apprentices and covered in soot. He carries a gleaming smith's hammer that seems eternally clean. Now, this little description makes him unique. In particular, the hammer that he has with him certainly should help him to stand out when it comes to players. Most players will clue into the fact that you've given this much of a description to an NPC at all, but how important this particular NPC is going to be depends on you and depends on the players. But the idea is that all adventurers are going to be visiting a smith at some point, especially a skilled one that can produce or work with rare materials to produce unique items is definitely going to be a high value NPCs for players. So putting in that little bit of extra effort certainly helps to make them just more memorable overall. And that goes to the working with NPCs episode. Just those little extra details that you throw in on there helps to make them stand out more and make them just a little bit more unique. And for example, to hammer home that point, this next location, the Deep Hearth's Arcane Sundries. The owner is Maris Feyweather, neutral halfling wizard. Bright and cheery-eyed, this brown-robed halfling has a happy gleam in her green eyes as a pearly smile splits her face. The shop is put together, but particularly packed full. And this, again, helps to evoke a certain kind of image. You know, it's a halfling-run wizard shop. It's homey, it's comfortable, but it is packed to the gills with this halfling stuff, the different items that she has for sale and available to the people that have the coin for her services. Now, another important detail, or at least I feel it's an important detail to have figured out when it comes to especially larger towns, are the factions within those towns or cities. And in this particular case, 30,000, there could certainly be more factions than what I have listed here. But again, I wanted to leave this open and flexible so that those of you who like what I have presented here, you can go ahead and take this and tweak it and adjust it or add to it in order to make it your own and make your own unique story out of all of this for yourself and for your players. But anyways, the factions here, we have the City Guard, obviously, and we have the Merchant's Order of the Silver Wheel. Given the level of trade that flows through here, it makes sense to me that there is an order of merchants, a council of merchants that get together, and even though they may be from rival conglomerates, rival merchant companies, they've still come together in order to make sure that trade flows smoothly between them, and that competition, while fierce, remains to a certain degree fair and more or less within the bounds of the law. Or at least that's the idea. Maybe a few of the members or all of the members are just using this as a front in order to conduct their own shady secret back deals to screw people over and run things their own way. Anyways, next up we have the Flint Blade Beggars Guild. I like Beggars Guild. I don't see Beggars Guilds come up all that often anymore in a whole lot of literature, in particular tabletop gaming literature. I still try to make use of them as much as I can. Something about the way Beggars Guilds operate just seemed uh, really cool to me. People posing um, as the needy and poor, and maybe several of them are needy and poor, but they work together and pool their resources together. And these are people that know how to survive, how to back each other up, and most importantly, these are people that get ignored by society at large. So they go unnoticed, and when they do get noticed, it's only briefly when somebody decides to either hurl a bunch of verbal abuse at them or drop a couple of coppers their way. These are people that can go all over the place and gather a few extra bits of information or get into the know on things that they're not supposed to know. And then next up, we have the Half Moon Thieves Guild, and also the Black Hearts Thieves Guild. Uh, what good's a city without a little guild on guild violence going on between it? It's an opportunity to present a little extra side activity for the characters. They could be working for one or both of these guilds, or they could work with the city guards in order to deal with these thieves guilds, or the merchants could hire them to deal with these guilds in particular. And the thieves guild, or the beggars guild, the players could conceivably go to in order to try to get a little bit of extra information as to the goings on within the city. The options just really depend on the limits of the players' imaginations and your own imagination when it comes to putting all of this together. Now, let's go ahead and pop on over to the next. And as I said, Tildeus is the largest hub within this particular region, but its economy is supported by a series of smaller towns. Here I've just come up with two outlying communities, one of which I've made particularly important to this story here. But first we have the town of Falcrest, a population of 500 people, neutral good overall. There is some rule of law, but for the most part the people are generally good people and just try to abide by one another without stepping on anybody's toes or causing any headache. The mayor is Donovan Hallmarsh, guard captain Brevik Stillwater. Again, these are characters that the players are more than likely to interact with if they decide to come to this location, or if you start the adventure in this location. Um, and the description here is a community of ranchers. There are literally hundreds more livestock than there are people here. The locations of interest for this town, we of course have the town hall, Endemir's Forge, and the Grey Glory Pub. Now, always have to have a pub in one of these towns. And certainly the city of Tildeus should have a couple of pubs of its own as well. Maybe even a high-class, fancy sort of place. And maybe one or two of those places are used as fronts for one or both of the thieves guilds. Anyways, next up, and this is what I've designated as a more important location, Milltown. It's a population of 600. It's more chaotic neutral. It's further out from the city of Tildeus, more frontierish. It's literally just a town that built up around a mill and its various mobile lumber camps. So it's definitely much more rough, not as well put together, and it's packed with quite a few more, well, not quite a few more, but more people than Falcrest. The mayor is Otto Gildebranch, level 2 fighter, level 2 rogue, level 2 bard. He's a lawful evil half-elf. He likes to run things by his own rules, and certainly he feels himself a fair bit above them. He's clearly better than these people, but he's here because there's money to be made running this place. Then we have the camp overseer, Porter Barish. The local guard captain is Garrick Endenvar, a level 5 fighter, a chaotic neutral half-orc that runs this place. running this place, you have to be tougher than the locals, and this guy is definitely the man for the job. The locations of interest here, we have the mill, the big reason why this place makes so much money, and uh, and certainly the most important and the largest feature of this town. We also have the overseer's office, the far strider supplies and sundries, and the Blackwood Hunters Hall. Now, one particular note I made here is that this place is the primary point of contention between the Elderwood Druid Circle and the city of Tildeus. And we need to see behind the scenes for details. Having little notes like this, it's not the kind of thing you'd want to show your players. You can certainly read and even show them some of these other details, but this kind of thing you would want to cover just so that the players remain a bit in the dark as to what the overall plot's about. It should always be a journey of discovery for the players. But we've gotten this done, so let's go ahead and pop over to the next page then. Now then, when it comes to details, you can never have too many details for your plot, or the side plots and any of the behind the scenes activities and notes that you have for yourself. This is what's going to help keep you on track, and it's what, well, it makes up the entirety of the story that you've put together for this adventure, or series of adventures as the case may be. But for what we have here, I'm just going to read this particular page and go over everything. The Elder Grove Druid Circle are going to war with the civilized peoples of Tildeus and the outlying communities over the destruction of one of their sacred groves. They are led by Elias Briarthorn, keeper of the Third Stone and the Stagrest Grove. It was Briarthorn's grove that had been defiled by loggers and the accompanying hunters who managed to slay his animal companion, defending the grove while he attended a meeting of Circle elders. Sensing the death of his lifelong friend, Elias stepped through the trees and found several trees of his grove felled. This filled the druid's heart with rage. Then his eyes swept over the surprised throng of loggers and huntsmen, till they fell upon his stag, Yamnaris, strung between two trees, headless and his pelt stripped from him. The storm in Elias's heart went from rage to a cold and hateful wrath. Taking his blade, he called down the strength and fury of nature, slaughtering the offenders to a man. He stripped the heads of hair and beards, tore the heart from a felled ironwood tree, and wove the hairs of the eldest men to its haft. Finally, in his grief, Elias tore the remaining hide and flesh from the skull of Yamnaris, the tatters reforming to neatly clasp under his chin as he donned the gruesome new helm. The blighted druid has gone on to raise the forces at the beck and call of his circle. Druids, beasts of the woods, a small gathering of worshippers, fey spirits, and the elemental forces of nature. So, that's the crux of the plot here. This is the major point of contention. Loggers and huntsmen coming out from Milltown defiled one of the sacred groves for this circle of druids and murdered, well, killed, hunted down the stag animal companion that was left defending the grove, and the stag belonged to a very powerful elder of this circle of druids. So, hence they're on the warpath. Now, from here, again, you can take this and mold and sculpt this in a number of different ways. You can certainly change this here. What I'm envisioning with this is that it should be understandable why the druids are going to war with the city of Tildeus and the outlying communities that they support. It should be a little bit conflicting for the characters. It should divide them a little bit, but over time as they go through this particular plot, unless they get a wild hair, ideally they should see the need to stop at least this particular druid, or at least try to find a way to stop the fighting between the two factions. As it is, I've set up some notes here regarding the factions, specifically the Elderwood Druid Circle. some of the things that they are going to be doing over the course of the adventure. And these notes here, not only does this help me to lay out the plan that the druids have, but it outlines certain parts of the adventure that the players can you can turn into parts of the adventure for the players to use and go through. The druids are enlisting fey creatures by entreating fairy nobles represented here in these woods. They're attempting to spread a blight to the Cragwood's eldest creatures by infecting their watering holes. The faction of the Elderwood Druid Circle is divided. Many of them want to limit hostile actions to simply destroying the mill and driving off the inhabitants. The other faction, led by Elias Briarthorn, want to wage total war and wipe everything out, wipe away all the civilized peoples. They want to just push them out and reclaim everything in this area. They're also using rituals to create Rotwood Defenders. And I'll go over what Rotwood Defenders are in a moment here. But these notes here, like I said, it helps to detail what the plans are and helps me to give me a certain amount of structure for the course of the adventure and the course of events so far. Now, I haven't detailed the factions for the city of Tildeus, nor have I done anything for any of these smaller factions within the city of Tildeus. But again, what I've kind of pictured here and put together so far is there was an agreement between the two sides, between the city of Tildeus and the Elder Grove Druid Circle. The agreement was that the loggers wouldn't cut deep into the woods and potentially destroy sacred groves or loot any cairns for the druids buried dead. And in return, the druids wouldn't chase away the hunters as long as the hunters were catching game and utilizing as much of their catch as possible. Harvesting all the bones, meat, hide, using as many bits as they could, and not just exclusively hunting for trophies. And as long as the loggers weren't destroying groves and nature in general wasn't being defiled, they would stay out of the way and even use some of their nature magics to replenish the woods that the logging camps were using, so that they wouldn't have to push deeper into their woods. This would be how they'd protect their groves to their benefit, as well as satisfy the needs of the city of Tildeus, the demands of their stock and trade. Now, going back to Milltown, you'll notice that the mayor I had made lawful evil, and I didn't give an alignment to the camp overseer yet. Again, that's something I was leaving a little bit up in the air. I picture the camp overseer being in on things with Milltown's mayor. Essentially, this agreement, this edict, was handed down to them by officials from the city of Tildeus, and they just quietly ignored this, and they still sent their loggers deeper into the woods. And the loggers found this particular grove. This is a sacred grove. There's a lot of raw nature magic here. So the growth of the animals and the trees and the plant and wildlife is just staggering. Powerful trees and trees that are clearly touched by this raw wild magic. In particular, ironwood trees, things that would be valuable to a logging community. And for this part of the story, luckily for the mayor and the camp overseer, there are no witnesses to what happened. There's nobody to say, oh yeah, no, they totally sent them out. Or at least that's what they think. That's what they hope for the most part, because Elias butchered every single last person that he found in the grove. So that's part of the plot here, is uncovering this mystery. The players, if they can find evidence of this treachery, or or somehow get the mayor and the camp overseer to confess. Maybe the camp overseer is conflicted. He knows that this oncoming war is his fault and the mayor's fault. Maybe he wants to confess, or maybe one of the loggers or hunters just offhandedly mentioned to a family member where they were going, that they were going deeper into the woods, even though word was they were supposed to be staying closer to the edges of the woods and not venturing deep. The options are just about limitless here for what you could potentially do, but I like the idea of this, that a potential investigation going on here as a way for the players to stop the fighting on both sides, or at least to press in and help to fracture the Elder Grove Druid Circle even further by making the Voices for Peace have a stronger voice for peace as the players hand over the people responsible for this conflict happening in the first place. Certainly, it would decrease Elias Briarthorn's power base. Anyways, speaking of Elias Briarthorn, the next most important thing, aside from details and plot, is the antagonist, the main driving force for the plot. Let's take a look over at him. Alright, so now we come to the primary antagonist for this story. At the top here, I've got a little bit more notes on the Elderwood Druid Circle. This sect of druids have ancient ties to the land in and around the Alaran Hills. As ancient guardians and keepers of the wilds, as well as numerous sacred groves, they've reacted more and more with alarm at the wide swaths of forests cut down and the grasslands made grazing fields for the numerous heads of cattle. The recent destruction of an ancient and sacred grove has driven the forces of nature they revere to react violently, along with a good number of the circle, their acolytes, and worshippers. And to that end, we have Elias Briarthorn, keeper of the third stone. Now, when it comes to this particular character, especially not just this character, but any antagonist that you have, you really want to try to build them from the ground up. This is where you want to put the most detail and effort into the grunts, the frontline troops, even some of the more elite troops. You can use fairly standard stuff. You don't need to go into such an extreme level of detail, as long as you have the character's combat statistics and some of the gear they may have on them. That's going to be plenty. You don't need to do a whole lot to characterize them, unless, again, one of the players gets that wild hair up their ass and they decide, oh yeah, we beat the crap out of this guy, now we're going to be friends. In that case, then yeah, scramble, put together a few extra details about the character, about that character, but it's the primary antagonist that's going to be the meat and potatoes of this whole thing. They are the driving force in this story. They precipitate all the factors for the story, especially in this case. We have Elias Briarthorn, keeper of the third stone. Over here, I've listed most of his relevant statistics. I still don't have the perception or AC figured out yet, but at this point I'm far enough along that you can see just the level of work and detail that's gone into this. And this isn't even the entirety of the character. I rolled his stats randomly, and I got a pretty solid set here. Strength of 14, Dex of 15, Constitution 18, Intelligence 10, Wisdom 20, and Charisma of 14. So he's reasonably strong, agile, definitely one tough bastard. Average intelligence, very, very wise, and he's got some force of personality behind him. Since he is a full druid, I listed his spell save DCs right along here with some of his other more relevant combat statistics. Having those things right at the top there, along with some of the pertinent identifier information, just helps make referencing a lot of these different things faster and easier than, say, to have it all scattered throughout here. And just below that, I have his attacks figured out, or at least his physical attack options. Um, and then from there, we have his abilities. Now, one thing I should note here and mention, believe I mentioned this before, I've built this entirely within the Pathfinder system, which is basically Dungeons and Dragons 3.75. Um, and in particular, I made him a druid, but I went with a particular druid archetype called the Blight Druid. It's a pretty reasonably powerful uh, difference. And for those of you that don't know, an archetype is basically an alternate take on a particular class. They have some alternate abilities that that are swapped out for other abilities that you find in the standard version of the class. And in this particular case, he's a blighted druid because of the defilement of his grove and the loss of his animal companion. And that's something particular to blighted druids. They no longer get to have an animal companion. They do gain familiars like wizards do, and they gain access to another domain of magic. But a couple other key features of their class change. And so he has been built to be just an absolute monster, and he should be. He's going to be the final confrontation for this entire adventure. He should be terrifying for the players to fight. Now, he has a full spellcasting class, but druids are a bit tougher than, say, wizards. Um, I I'm inclined to say that at least in Pathfinder terms, comparing putting druids up against even say clerics, especially if they're built right, I'd say that druids could potentially be a lot scarier than some clerics, and I'll go over why with this here. Covered his nature bond. I gave him the destruction domain of magic. Certainly not all around the most useful domain option that he could have taken, but it fit his story and his background. And as always, story is going to be the number one consideration. Story and fun. Was destruction the most optimal option I could have taken? No, but it makes sense for him to have things like the disintegrate spell. Let him just completely annihilate the works of civilized man in their entirety. Um, as a blighted druid, he also gains vermin empathy, his nature sense, woodland stride. He also projects a miasma. Any adjacent creatures have to make a fortitude save or be sickened for 1 round. Sickened imposes some penalties to the characters affected by it. So getting in close with him is dangerous, and he's built all around being in close and fighting it out. As a druid, he has the ability to take a wild shape 5 times a day. He can change into either a huge or diminutive animal. He could turn into a huge elemental creature or a huge plant creature if he wanted to. Um, what I envision for Elias here over the course of this story, when the players fight him, if he does take a wild shape form, he's going to take the form of a dire stag, and because he's a blighted druid, it's going to be pustule-ridden, mangy hide, foul odors emanating off of it, and sickly ichors dripping out of its many porous, pustulating wounds. Now, let's see here. Oh, the other thing, his one of his other abilities is he's a plague bearer. Any touch attacks, unarmed strikes, or natural weapons striking him also force the attacker to make a fortitude save or contract a disease as per the contagion spell. And in this case, I went with blinding sickness. The target becomes sickened, fatigued, and exhausted. Standard actions require another fortitude save or they lose the action entirely. And failing 2 turns of fortitude saves renders the target permanently blind. Just being sickened, fatigued, and exhausted and potentially losing your action each round is devastating enough in combat, but to also be uh, potentially permanently blinded is just absolutely devastating and should make the characters think twice about how they go toe to toe with this character. This particular character build is definitely a hard counter for players like other druids or monks, since monks typically will be attacking with their hands and their feet. Anytime they touch this guy, even if they hurt him, he's potentially going to end up screwing them over way more. Now, let's go on to the next page here. And you can see here I've built out his, even down to his skills. Now, most of his skills are not really going to factor overall when it comes to his reveal and fight with the players at the climax, or if they somehow decide they want to engage him sooner, earlier on in the story, they can, that could potentially happen as well. But his most relevant skills are going to be his perception skill. Fly, maybe if he turns into a form that has the ability to fly, that might factor in. But predominantly, it's going to be his perception skill, his ability to notice things, like, say, the party's rogue slipping up behind him to plant a dagger between his ribs. That might be something he wants to keep an eye out for. We also have his feats and proficiencies. I listed all the stuff that druids are typically proficient with, but part of this build, for making this antagonist just the beastly powerhouse that he is, gave him the natural spell feat. It lets him cast his magic in wild shape. Typically, as many of you probably know, druids lose the ability to cast magic normally when they're in their wild shape form, unless they take this feat. They take this feat, whatever form that they turn into, they can keep casting their magics. Makes them way more versatile and way, way more deadly. And then also gave him combat casting, improved initiative, quick draw, combat reflexes, standstill, stops enemies from moving past him, power attack, and cleave. The combat reflexes and standstill, I threw that in there because part of his equipment, he has a staff that functions like a spear, so he's got a little bit of reach. And the part of this antagonist, this NPC's mindset, is that he's trying to wipe everything out. So he's determined to not let his enemies escape, and so he thinks like a predator. He's a rabid, wild predator, but he still thinks things through. He stalks his opponents. He corners them and traps them, and he uses his spear to keep them cornered and trapped. So if his enemies try to flee past him and he's got them cornered, and the only way out is to go past or through him, he's got the ability to make extra attacks of opportunity and also stop his enemies from moving past him. To top it off, also gave him power attack and cleave, so that way he can, going two-handed with the spear or his scimitar, he can swing hard, hit hard, and if he does hit, he gets to make an extra free attack against an adjacent target. So he can pump out a fair bit of damage, even though he, as a druid, a 13th level druid, he only has 2 attacks available to him on his regular turn. This gets him a few extra attacks there if enemies try to flee, or if he tags somebody in the middle of combat. Now, his spells I've listed out here. I'm not going to go over every single last spell. A lot of it is combat-oriented stuff. One thing I will say, for a full spellcasting class, now, I don't like munchkins. I don't like players that stack races with racial bonuses on top of templates with different template bonuses, and taking this particular curse and getting that particular item and stacking everything together to make a character that is absolutely broken and overwhelmingly effective with no regard to story. Like I keep saying, story is always going to be number one. Story is king. Story should always come first. Now, in this case, I focus this character mostly on combat. Now, I did munchkin with him a little bit, but there is story reason behind all of this. And And to that end, I've made him out to be fairly devastating. And when it comes to full spellcasting classes, one of the things to bear in mind with the mechanics is that uh, blasting spells, spells that just are outright built to do a lot of damage, like say a wizard's fireball spell, they're not the most effective thing mechanically. I mean, uh, a fireball can potentially do 10d6 points of damage, but the average around that's just about, the 30-ish damage range. And well, there's a lot of creatures out there that can eat 30 points of damage pretty readily. What's better to do is, at least what I think from a mechanical standpoint, is to use spells that affect the terrain, that don't go away, that have continuous effects, not just blasting. Like, for example, Spike Growth. It's a 3rd level spell. At 13th level, he has a 230-foot range, and he can throw down, uh, was it 15 20-foot squares that last for 13 hours. And for every 5 feet of movement, they'll do 1d4 piercing damage. So, not a lot of damage right up front, but it's a 20-foot square, and he can produce 15 20-foot squares over a huge area. And every time they take damage, they have to make a reflex save. And if they fail, their movement is halved. So little things like that's mechanically a bit more effective, and it makes this particular antagonist that much more terrifying, and it fits in line with his mindset of his goal is to wipe everything out, all the civilized peoples. He is a predatory creature now. He's a blighted druid. He is out of his mind with rage and destruction, and the corruption in his mind, body, and spirit is spreading to everything else. And his spells, in particular, reflect his new mindset. And one other thing to do here when it comes to spells like this is to note some of the strategies that your player, or that this particular NPC is going to enact. In particular, he has the Stone Skin spell. If he can, he will try to cast Stone Skin prior to combat, and he tries to keep in the know as to what's going on around him so that he knows when combat is coming, especially if it's going to be combat with particularly dangerous opponents. And what Stone Skin does, for those of you that don't know, it gives him a damage reduction, meaning anytime somebody hits him, let's see, it's 10 points of damage reduction unless he's being hit with an adamantium weapon. So anytime somebody hits him with a weapon that's not made out of adamantium, whatever damage they roll, they have to subtract 10 points off the top of it before any damage gets applied to them. So somebody does 12 points of damage, the Stone Skin spell lops off 10 points from that, so they only end up dealing 2 points of damage. This lets him stay in combat longer and be more effective in combat. Now for his equipment, an antagonist should have awesome gear. And it should not only be awesome in terms of its power, but there should be some story stuff with it too. And when it comes to the power, it doesn't have to be overwhelmingly game-breaking stuff, but it certainly can be a bit more powerful. Anyways, in this particular case, he has the Crown of Yumnaris, the antlered skull of Briarthorn's departed animal companion. Bits of flesh still exist in eternal decay. A fell gleam emanates from a pustulating socket. With this helm, he can automatically scry through any plague-bearing animal or vermin. In life, Yumnaris was hailed as king of the forest. That connection exists now as a seething hate, linking the crown with any corrupted creature. Then we have Rot Talon. Originally a scimitar fashioned from the heartwood of an ironwood tree, the plagues of body and spirit within its owner have carried over to the blade, and now Rot Talon seeps with foul liquors and pus-dripping wounds, spreading disease to all it touches. It has the Flesh Rot ability. Failing a DC 21 Fortitude save on a crit means the target takes 2d6 damage a round till they save. This lets him do just a little bit more damage if he decides to go toe to toe using Rot Talon. And again, this is not something that's strictly within the rules, but like I've said before in the previous videos I've done here, the rules are a good framework. They give you an idea of how the game is supposed to function, but not everything you come up with or everything that happens is going to fit so neatly within that framework. So you should be comfortable with just house ruling things a little bit or coming up with your own unique little things. And I got the idea from this from watching some Twitch streams and playthroughs of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, specifically Penny Arcade's Acquisitions Incorporated and Acquisitions Incorporated the C Team. Fantastic shows. If you haven't seen them, please pop on over, watch through them. There are plenty of videos to watch. You'll spend days and days trying to get caught up. And anyways, I'm sorry. I'm not here to plug Penny Arcade stuff. I just did. Point being, I like their stuff. Go check it out. They'll give you plenty of ideas. But in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, there's a thing called necrotic damage. That's not necessarily included in Pathfinder. They don't have things, or at least I haven't seen anything like necrotic damage in here. And I like the idea of this flesh-eating bacteria infesting this blade. It's short-lived away from the blade because it's magically generated, but each time it touches the target, each time it deals damage, or the blade deals damage, some of that bacteria transfers and the players take extra damage from it. And in particular with a critical hit, it means not only did they get hit and catch some of this bacteria, but it actually buried deeper into the wound, so it's able to thrive longer as it multiplies and eats away through the flesh, just liquefying that flesh with necrosis and putrefaction. It's just grody, but it's pretty damn cool too. It's a pretty terrifying sword. It's only a +2 scimitar, so it's not the most magically powerful weapon out there, but overall, the idea is just really cool. This ironwood scimitar, this living material blade is now just infected with this horrible contagion, and it's pitted and scarred from this contagion seeping through it. This is cool imagery, very thematic imagery. And then finally here we have Plagueheart. This wicked staff ends in a sharpened, rusted point. The black and brown tassels, on closer inspection, are the scalps and beards of his victims, wet with a substance that clings the grisly decorations to the gnarled haft. And the staff has the ability to befoul. Any source of water the staff comes in contact with will become corrupted over time. 3 times per day, this staff can be used to ruin water supplies and potions in a 60-foot radius. Will save DC 20 to resist. Any unattended items automatically fail. So this gives him a few more options in combat, especially against the players who chances are they're going to have potions on them. He can use this, affect an area around him, anybody that's gotten in close with him, and potentially ruin any healing supplies or any extra combat options that they had on hand. Now the players have a chance to save and resist this, but again, this is meant to be a tough fight. This is meant to be a really big challenge. So this is an extra bit of that challenge there, this little bit of equipment here. And also one other feature, ritual focus. This staff may be used in a number of rituals, including the creation of Rotwood Defenders. These are woodwoads from 3rd edition. The woodwoads, they were, I don't know, I'm not big on the name, but I like the idea. These they're not quite like Ents. They're shorter. They are made of living wood. They do move around and have an intelligence. They are a plant-like creature, but they're more human-sized, and they're made of wood and bark. And it's not strange for them to ally with druids and any woodwoads that were allied with Briarthorn prior to all of this, would make sense that his hatred, this corruption festering within him, would spread to them as well. And he can use the staff plague heart that he made after he had butchered the loggers and the hunters that defiled his grove, that he could use this staff to create more of them, and and he can use them to create various other plant monsters, and they would all come out with the disease template. And this is just a rough, quick template that I came up with. Again, the idea is that there's nothing that quite fits in with this, but I like the idea of a druid's corruption spreading to other things, not just annihilating other plants, but changing them, making them diseased, so that creatures' natural attacks gain the flesh rot quality as described on Rot Talon. Anytime they strike a target, they take an extra 1d6 disease damage. And they also have the miasma feature that Briarthorn has. Creatures adjacent to the target make a DC 10 plus hit dice fortitude save or be sickened for 1 round. So that means basically, say a creature has 4 hit dice or 4 levels. The difficulty that they're rolling is 10 plus those hit dice. So 10 plus 4, that's a 14. It's a DC 14 fortitude save, or they end up being sickened for 1 round. And because this is such a I think it's an effective template, but it's not a huge or robust one. It's not giving bonuses to stats. It's just giving a little extra damage and a few extra effects. I figure it's about a challenge rating 1 kind of template, meaning the creature is just a little bit extra difficult. It might potentially be a 2, but that's, again, small details, and certainly you could take this template or this custom template if you wanted and change it up however you saw fit. Maybe you think that the creature should come out tougher being so diseased, something kind of like what you'd find in Warhammer 40k or the Warhammer Fantasy Universe. Space Marines in service to the Plague Lord Nurgle, their bodies become bloated with corruption to the point that they become more immune to damage, and their senses are so overwhelmed with the disease, or that they just have an absolute absence of pain, so they just don't feel the damage that they're taking. You could do something like that with this template and use it in this setting. Now, we've talked about the antagonist, how important he is to the story, and why detailing him is so important. And it's important because the primary antagonist is going to feature for the climax of your story. It should be exciting, and it should be challenging, and it should be really damn tough. And this particular character, I think, would be really tough, would be a really big challenge, even if a group of players had their characters, they were leveled up to the point to where they should be able to, in theory, match him evenly. It should still be a pretty full fight, a pretty hard fight for them too, because this is the primary antagonist. He is not going to be alone. There will be other characters with him, and he's running a war, so he is not going to be the only tough character on the side of the druid circle. He's going to have lieutenants and sub-commanders underneath of him. And given the theme that's set up with this corruption here, how his corruption is spreading, and how he can create more corrupted creatures, his underlings should follow a similar kind of style. I was taking a look at some of the other druid templates, and there's one that's particularly centered around poisons, around different poison effects and abilities that I think would mesh pretty nicely with this. The poison effects could be described as an aberration, a result of the corruption just reacting uniquely with that particular character's physiology or the magic coursing through them. You have a crazy number of options of ways to describe it, but You could throw another druid in with him. You could also throw in a ranger, especially since the this particular group within the Elderwood Druid Circle is looking to corrupt some powerful creatures that live deep within the Cragwoods. A ranger, or having a ranger on board, provides a more combat focused character that is also has a high degree of survival and has some access to nature magics. Not to the same extent that druids do, but it just fits pretty nicely and thematically, and it would make sense to send a ranger out to go and be the one to corrupt these creatures, to affect the watering holes and spread this corruption to them, so that the druids have some pretty powerful monsters on hand for when they take their fight to the city of Tildeus. Anyways, that's the climax there. But as we talked about, any good story has a beginning, middle, and end. The middle, I've left a little bit open here to, actually, let's face it, it's pretty wide open here. But again, I've left it that way with the idea in mind that you, either myself or any of you watching and listening to this right now, you can take this and write out your own story. But let's go ahead and take a look at arguably the most important part of any story, and that's the beginning, your opening moments to grip your players. Let's go take a look. For the beginning here, to make it easy on myself, I imagine that the players, their characters, are all in on the same caravan. Maybe not necessarily all riding in the same wagon together, but they're all in the same specific isolated area, all traveling in the same direction for heading towards Tildeus. Now, for this here, a few miles outside of town, you are all on the road for one reason or another, but whatever myriad webs of choice and fate have brought you out here to the Alaran Hills. Riding on carts and horses as part of the caravan, you've enjoyed gorgeous sights such as the ancient dwarf tunnel roads of Balfric Hall and survived the treacherous Giant's Fall Pass. While you and the hired guards are no strangers to violence, what you now come upon, rounding a bend in the road through the steep hills surrounding Tildeus, shocks you to your core. And then the characters have to make a DC 13 will save or be sickened on failure. It's nothing especially serious, nothing that's going to last long. It's a status you can essentially ignore. It's just there for that little extra bit of flavoring as the players progress through this opening. You find another caravan, or at least the remains of one. The wagons are tipped and broken to pieces, covered in vines and plant growth. Bodies are strewn about in the aftershocks of an orgy of violence. You can see a number of bodies are bound to wagon axles, set upright in the ground like macabre scarecrows, with strange flowers blossoming from their eyes and mouths. Others are very badly mauled, the pieces scattered, a few guttering fires still smolder here and there. Now then, when it comes to the opening, after these few opening moments, the players are going to want to interact with the scenery a bit somehow. And you want to have a number of ways for them to do that, so that way all the players have a chance to feel useful and involved. This helps just to pull them in more to the story. Perception DC 15 reveals the vines are sprouting from the wood itself, and they grow through the nearby bodies. There are also numerous tracks on the ground. Most of the ones leaving are clearly not human. Curiously, you don't see any animal carcasses, indicating that none of the horses or oxen that were pulling these wagons were killed. It's just the drivers and the guards, the people the people that were part of the caravan were the only targets, and of course the wagons themselves. A knowledge arcana or religion DC 15 reveals a great deal of magic was used here, especially conjuration. DC 18 also will reveal as above, and also you also find the telltale signs of ritual magics having been used. The spacing of the scarecrows are oriented towards the cardinal directions, and you find several items of metalwork that have near rusted to brittleness and dust, arranged in a wide circle around the effigies. And now, from this point here, you can leave this as just this investigation of this site if you so choose. I picture this as a bit of a combat encounter with some Rotwood defenders leaping up, or maybe perhaps there are some of the druids worshippers laying an ambush, or maybe there's a couple of creatures on hand. I also like the idea of some of these vines and brambles being assassin vines, so that the characters that have gotten too close, whether it's NPCs or player characters, are caught by surprise as the vines latch on. And you can also throw in here a knowledge nature check for, say, if there's a ranger or a druid on board, or for some reason another character that has a good deal of knowledge nature on hand, they can notice the assassin vines prior to the ambush. Also, players should have an opportunity to roll another perception check in order to notice a potential ambush laying in wait for them, or see some sign of it about to happen, just so at least they are not entirely caught by surprise. But yeah, I picture this as a combat encounter that helps to draw the players in. It it gets them more involved by subjecting them to the violence that the this particular faction of druids is wreaking on the countryside. Now, there there is one question that comes to mind. It comes to mind because, well, I've gotten some feedback on what I've shot so far. Is why didn't the druids just destroy Milltown right off the bat? Well, I thought about it, and the answer is this, at least in what I see here, what I'm putting together here, and what I'm picturing in my head. Destroying the mill is the obvious choice, especially once it's known and clear that the druids are on the warpath. And so, Milltown has shorn up its defenses. They've gotten prepared for a fight. They've used some of the extra timbers to build fortifications. They're on the river, so it wasn't hard to make a little moat for them. So they've made a hardened point to attack, which, again, the druids have magic on their side, but fortifications are fortifications. Not all of their not all of their help is magical in nature, and as powerful as Briarthorn is, he can't be everywhere at once, and there are several important tasks being undertaken at this particular point in time. So he sent out different little marauding warbands out to cause chaos, wreak havoc and destruction, to pull the guards that normally patrol the roads and the trails, to force them to basically be on high alert and draw them away to different areas, or possibly even ambush those guards and slowly choke off support to Milltown as part of a longer siege. And doing this causes problems deeper in his opponent's territory, as well as chokes off Milltown, and it also buys him time to rally more of his forces, to gather more beasts of the forest, to spread his plagues further, to spread that corruption further. And given the plagues and the corruptions, he can use the time that he has here to potentially try to sicken the people of Milltown, so that way the defenders are racked with these contagions and unable to defend themselves, or even better, unable to escape. The fortifications then become a box that they've just trapped themselves in, and they are dying slowly of this rotting decay that's claiming them one by one, so that when the druids, if they ever decide to just sweep over it, they face no resistance. It's just plagued, bloated, corrupted bodies. And then they can just easily march to the town, annihilate it all, utterly and completely destroy the mill, and have virtually no losses on their part. It's a more effective, longer term strategy. Like I said, it does three things for Briarthorn. He gets to cause havoc deeper into enemy territory, and that havoc helps to choke off Milltown from supplies and reinforcements, and it buys him more time to rally more of his forces together. And that's what I picture as the opening acts for all of this here. The players may end up going to Milltown, and if they do, just given what's coming for them, what's coming for Milltown, it would behoove the players to try to buy whatever time they could, but also try to convince the townspeople to evacuate, to convince them that they're not prepared for what's about to come. But they can't do that without evidence. So perhaps maybe they have to move forward from there. They have to go into the woods. They have to go into enemy territory and bring back evidence of this corruption, of this vile, seething force of hatred that's just coming for them, and maybe bring back proof of the enemy's strength and show them, yeah, you can't stand up to this kind of crap. You gotta go. You've got to run for Tildeus. Get behind strong stone walls and defend yourself. The more defenders there, the better. But that's just what I picture. What you picture may be something entirely different. It may be much, much better than what I have in mind. So I definitely recommend you go out there and take this. And we'll be revisiting this particular setting again. I'll keep adding more to it the further I get into the DM Guide series. Anyways, I have been Jordan. I am your resident master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you for joining me down here in the Gamer's Den. I know this episode was a bit longer than the others, but we took key ideas from the previous videos posted, and we also went over the process and the steps for putting together a better campaign. And that does take a bit of time. All told, this probably took me about 4 hours of work, roughly, maybe 5, maybe less than 4. Kind of lost track there. Like I said, this kind of stuff is just fun for me. I like putting these custom settings together. At any rate, thank you for joining me here. If you liked that video, please hit like and subscribe. Also click that little bell icon there so that you get notified anytime I have new content being posted up to YouTube here. Thank you for your time. You folks have yourselves a good night.